for the next one. Okay. So we have Scott Bellamy. He's a senior risk control consultant for Wells Fargo, and Kenny is going to assist Kenny Smith again from One Beacon.
How's everybody? We're obviously not Leon Frizzell. He was our consultant. He called me yesterday, and he definitely was sick. Something was wrong with him. I could hardly understand him on the phone, so I told him, yeah, go on and stay at home. We don't need your flu spread around 50 other people here. So we're going to try our best to fill in. Leon is an excellent fleet consultant. He was a former, ran the Texas DOT from a compliance standpoint, so he's the one that we funnel all our more difficult type DOT type questions to and compliance type questions to him. So if there's anything that comes up that we can answer, we're going to try to do our best. But if there is anything, then we'll get the questions to Christy or to one of us, and we'll certainly get the answers for you. Okay. I can use the remote. Okay. First, the different types of vehicles, and Kenny's going to assist me here and throw in some color and analyst as we kind of go through here. But a commercial vehicle, a general commercial vehicle, is a combination vehicle. It's over 26,000 pounds, used to transport property, and it requires a Class A license. Combination meaning a large truck over 26,000 pounds is possibly pulling a trailer, maybe it's over 10,000 pounds, where that might come into play. We were just talking about it. If you've got like a tractor trailer hauling the piece of equipment like a backhoe or something like that, a situation where you're going to certainly have over 26,000 pounds, a trailer with a piece of equipment, certainly going to be over 10,000 pounds, then you're going to fall into the Class A required license. There's also a Class B commercial license. It's a single vehicle over 26,000 pounds and towing a vehicle that does not exceed 10,000 pounds. So the requirements are kind of confusing there. Or it can be a passenger vehicle to transport over 24 passengers. So when you're talking about school buses, big vans, anything like that, to where a driver's transporting more than 24 people, then you have to have a Class B license. And these vehicles cannot have air brakes. So if you have air brakes, then you've got to have this specialized endorsement here, a Class A, Class L restriction here on the CDL license.
Yes, Scott. The intent, I think, here on these few slides is simply to underscore the necessity to make sure that you have the right license in the possession of the driver. And if you know you're going to be hiring a particular type driver for a vehicle, you need to know ahead of time what it is you're going to be looking for during your hiring process. Is it going to be a Class A license? Is it going to be a Class B? Would it have a P endorsement on it? If you're going to be transporting, 16 to 23 passengers, is it a Class C with a P endorsement? Most likely, yes. But the intent is we need to know ahead of time, not me, you guys, as the management group, know what it is that you're trying to hire for. There are a lot of questions and a lot of detail in that licensing category. So just know what it is that you're trying to fill, what position, and fill that.
And I know one thing that you're probably thinking is that we don't come under the DOT. We don't follow. We drive exempt vehicles and things like that. What we're describing here is a best practice for you to have when you're hiring people or when you're putting drivers into position. We know that it's not likely that the DOT is not going to stop your vehicle out there if it's an exempt vehicle. They know that you're also a government agency like they are. So this is just really a good best practice. We're going to get into this a little bit. You need to consider the driver, their physical demands. A school bus versus a delivery van. What kind of vehicle are you going to hire that person to drive? Are they properly experienced to drive that type of vehicle? Medical certificates are generally required if they're going to be driving the school bus. On a commercial vehicle, they've got to go through the medical evaluations. Drivers responsible for transportation of passengers and cargo. and driver is responsible for a minor damage, demolishing a vehicle, or if they kill multiple people, the driver is going to be held liable and for that. Any questions about the liabilities and
Scott, let's say we put a Class A license in a vehicle greater than 26,000 pounds carries property on a Class C license. Doesn't that expose us to potential additional liabilities?
Yeah, I mean, you mean if you put them in a vehicle that requires a Class A, but they're have a Class C license? Okay, that's what you're trying to say. Yeah, it certainly could open up additional liability for SORM and for your agency if the person's not qualified to drive that license. They cause a bad accident, they damage people, or hopefully that would never happen, but they end up having a fatality type accident. Yes, they can be looking at the driver, they can be looking at the agency, and when I'm talking about the plaintiffs, attorneys, and people like that, they're going to be looking to say, well, that guy wasn't even qualified to drive that kind of vehicle. Why did you have him driving that vehicle that led to that accident?
I just want to, when they're talking about additional liabilities, this could be an employment practices liability or a director's and officer's liability because you're managing this activity, you're putting someone who's not qualified to perform this activity, and they're in harm's way and they cause harm to others. So just so we're clear, it's not necessarily other auto-related liabilities. That's risk is there too, but it could even turn into employment practices or directors and officers.
Thank you. And when you're looking at their application, when a person comes in and they're going to drive for you, a complete review of their application's a definite must. You must look at their application, see what their references are, see what their past work experience is. A red flag is an incomplete application. Somebody doesn't mention something, or somebody leaves something out of their application. Maybe they don't want to mention something, or maybe they're hiding something. So you will need to confirm their driving experience with prior employers, and multiple employers is an indicator of behavioral issues. So if you have somebody apply with you that maybe has been a job hopper, they've jumped to several different jobs in a short period of time, that could be a red flag, and somebody maybe that you don't want to have driving your vehicles. Anything you want to add to that?
Yes, keep in mind that the way the insurance is currently written is that it's written on the individual vehicle. Let's think primarily about those vehicles that we own and operate, not necessarily the personal vehicles that are driven. For the sake of this conversation, let's just think about those that your agency owns and we're operating. No matter where that vehicle goes or what happens with that vehicle, your agency is responsible for it. So we need to be responsible for who's driving it. It doesn't make any difference if we left the keys in the driveway and somebody just went by and said, hey, look at this, it's a free vehicle, and they take it and drive it off and crash it. It's still covered under the agency policy. So no matter where the vehicle goes or who's driving it, it's going to be covered in most respects. Now, this whole series of best practices here, we need to make sure that we're thinking about it from a management perspective, because it's all about driver management. Go ahead, Scott.
And we're going to get into this in my presentation in a little bit, but prior accidents, traffic convictions, and all must be carefully reviewed. So if you do find out, we're going to get into MVR pooling and the requirements for MVRs. We'll get into that in my presentation next. But, if a person has prior convictions, prior accidents, you really need to look at that person. If they disclose that, they may disclose it on their application. Yeah, I've got a couple of speeding tickets, or I had an accident 2 years ago or something. They may disclose that. If they do, you got to really look at it. Substance and alcohol testing is required if a driver has a CDL. That's another part of the CDL process of having a commercial driver's license. Is there certain requirements for substance abuse testing, and training goes along with that too. Ensure road test is performed. Review their experience. Make sure they're they have the right training. Road test, a lack of a road test, or a road test may review to you or may reveal to you that they don't have the proper experience. So if they're going to be driving a larger vehicle, have them take a road test. We've got forms available. I'm sure Kenny's got forms available to document a road test, just like you did and you would do if you took a new driving test, or maybe your kids do, and they go and they ride with the police officer or the DPS officer, and they, mark down what they make them do, certain things, backing, turning, all that. Take that kind of test with somebody, show that they're proficient in operating that kind of vehicle in traffic, and they know how to make turns, and they don't follow closely, all those kind of things. So it's certainly just another little bit of risk management process that you can implement there. Ensure the applicant has knowledge of the equipment, ability to care for the vehicle. Does he abuse the equipment during the road test? When you're riding with the person, do they go too fast? Do they slam on the brakes? Do they swerve? Do they indicate behaviors in driving that would say, well, maybe we really don't want this person driving our vehicle? So be on the lookout for any of that as well.
Remember, as a management group, you're responsible for who's driving.
Ask your applicant as well how they fit in with other employees. They're going to be dealing with other employees. Kind of look at that. Think about that when you're interviewing them. How well will they get along with our customers or the people in the public that they're going to be dealing with? Those are all questions you ask as you're interviewing a person and talking to them. Will they fit into our work environment here? Will they kind of fit in with all the employees and everyone? Make sure that an overqualified person's looking for a driver position. I know employment things are getting better now, at least the statistics, and they all say they are, but you may have had some people that are really overqualified for maybe some of the jobs that they've been applying for because they needed work. Well, look at that, consider that, and say, does that person, explain to them, do you really need a driver's job making this amount of money, and looking at that, and because you may have a overqualified person looking for that type of position. You want to certainly take that into account. Selection process is designed to uncover facts, skills, abilities, which a decision can be made about the applicant. And then recheck the required forms for completeness. All required tests are performed before making an offer, and that's important there, before making the offer. So don't say, yeah, we're going to hire you, go on and drive, and next week we're going to put you through a driver's test. Do all that on the front end. Pre-qualify that employee before you hire them. And we'll get into the MBR thing in a little bit later on. But if you are running an MBR, when you run your MBR, base that, passing the MBR, being a qualified driver, and their employment based on getting the right information back on the MBR. You don't want to put him in position, putting this person in position, having them driving for a few weeks, then you decide, well, we'll pull an MBR and it comes back terrible. Well, then you've already put them in the job. Then you're in a tight situation. And I won't go into what the HR ramifications of that could be, but you've hired a person, you let them drive, now you find out that they really shouldn't be driving for you. Perform annual document review of their driving record. We'll talk about that a little bit. This is the whole process. I kind of let Kenny take this one on. He's been talking about the management cycle. You want to touch on some of that?
Absolutely. When we talk about some of the basic policy and procedures, what we're trying to accomplish is you're trying to draw that box of acceptable behavior that you require of the driver. Those are called policy and procedures. If you are developing that box of acceptable behavior and you're asking the employees to operate inside that box, that's called active management. And if we're going through that process and we're enforcing the process, we're going to go a long way down the road showing that we have done our due diligence as a management staff in setting the guidelines, managing the employee, going through discipline processes, trying to correct those behaviors. It's going to keep us out of some of those great big dollar claims where they're asserting that we've got some sort of negligent maintenance or management operations going on there. So when it all revolves around this, we set the policy and procedures, we assign those roles and responsibilities, we go through that whole qualification process for the hiring, and we make training available. We recommend that everybody go through that process. When we're following up on it, man, we come out with a very reasonable management process, and that's really what we're trying to get across here, is we need to have a strong management process. Each one of your divisions may look a little different when we talk about a safety program, and that's what Scott's going to talk about here in just a short while, some of those components. It's not that everybody needs to be exactly cookie cutter the same, but you need to go through that process of making sure that you have assigned those responsibilities, you can follow up and enforce them. One of the worst things we can do is to have a set of policies and procedures that's so voluminous that we can't possibly enforce it. There has to be a really equitable set of processes there, policy and procedures, that you can enforce on a consistent basis. We don't need the custom to be one thing and then our policies say something else. They need to be one and the same. So that needs to be a real carefully crafted management process for each one of your divisions. And that's where these folks at the SORM office can help you out.
Here's just some other resources for you. Just some different websites. Like Chrissy has said several times, if you want some of these presentations, we have them and can provide them to you. You can contact myself, contact Kenny, or you can write down some of these. But these are just different resources available out there to help you do just the job that Kenny was talking about putting in place and doing. You know, we have a thing here for looking at MVRs, a couple of screening companies. I have a company I've put some of my clients on the private sector in touch with that run MVRs on a regular basis for them. It's like almost like a subscription type service. You know, you pay for so many drivers and they monitor their files the entire time and will notify the client if something pops up on an MVR that maybe the employee who's supposed to tell you whether they had an accident or got a ticket or something, maybe they don't, then this pops up on their screen and they'll notify you. So-and-so had a speeding ticket last week, or however often they report that. So,
Scott, I believe one of the handouts that we had back here on the side table had actually a description on how to take advantage of that. Is that right?
Yes, how to order them through DPS for free for the state agencies.
Very good.
Any questions on this presentation? Okay.
A lot of our drivers, you know, being that they're student workers, keep their out-of-state license, keep their out-of-state plate. So after the initial FDR, the DBS check's really a joke. So
They
it's trying to show Georgia tickets.
Yeah, they go out of state.
Yeah. And
There are services that you can build. The people I was mentioning, I can get it with Christy or get anybody the information, but they're basically every state. They'll basically run them they're from Louisiana, Oklahoma, wherever, and they can run the MVRs for them if you want to.
Well, we do that on Apple. But there's no Texas is one of the states that does not require students or military to get a Texas license. So they can stay in state 4 years undergrad, 4 years in high school.
But as a management responsibility, you need to be checking their individual state licenses.
There's a question on that because we have a system responsibility, so we write system procedures, not policies. Policies means you're going above the law. Procedures mean this is what the state law says you have to do. And I've yet to see where the state law says that annual MVR is after initial hire requirement.
Keep in mind that these are best practices.
I understand.
That these are not guidelines that you have to follow, you know, to have coverage.
Yeah, and that's the hard stuff.
So these are the things that should be there in place.
Your business operations are always going to be a consideration. There's some agencies that have 40,000 employees. They can't possibly manage the MVR checking and repeating on an annual basis. And therefore they choose to do it, you know, maybe biannually or every 3 years. So your business operations are unique and you have to make management decisions based on those two. So,
As long as you're doing due diligence and you have a plan and, you're doing what you can to mitigate the risk, then that's all we ask for as a
But then I guess
participant.
my other question would be, you guys, they have to have a commercial license for some of these buses and things. But since they're not, quote, affecting commerce under DOT, you can't do the drug testing. Because if you're going to say law that requires drug testing just for, a 18-passenger bus.
CDL. It's the same law.
CDL is affecting commerce. Yes, it's the Department of Transportation state law.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you cannot ask for it.
Right, but what I'm saying is, since you're driving a state vehicle, sovereignty of the state, not affecting commerce. So how would you enforce doing drug testing with somebody that is not required by law to begin with?
so is it a requirement to obtain a license?
Mhm.
Because they're subject to different rules and regulations. Like, they're over, they're constitution, or any detectable amount.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. More stringent.
Under their
And
license,
enforcement.
under the rules of their license, nothing to do with anything.
As a supervisor of a CDL driver, we have to maintain records of their doing the things that are required to maintain that license.
Judy and Sam head up our training at SORM, and the CDL license is actually one of the courses that they provide training on. They have resources
We
on,
just did
excuse me.
one for Steve, we did a custom CDL class for Steve down in, it was Wellness, Lake Jackson, it was, Glaciers.
Basically, Commerce decides if they have a CDL license, the drug testing is a component of obtaining that license and maintaining that license. So it would all be handled and done through the licensing process.
So that comes up one every 5 years for that, do that. Or, yeah.
Or sounds correct.
So then
And
you
The
would
problem
have,
with CDLs is, if people make buildings and wait 10 years at least in court to be heard.
Well, keep in mind as well
It's going to
that,
be on there for beyond, it's going to be on there beyond the MDR check, the GPS.
Right.
The court date will be 15 years out.
keep in mind that you have reasonable suspicion testing at your disposal as well. So if you suspect that you have an individual that is using drugs, alcohol, that sort of thing, that can be a prompt to send them down. You don't have to have an established drug testing program prior to hire, that sort of thing. But if you have something set up where it's just basic reasonable suspicion and post-accident, that's going to catch most of these circumstances.
Best practices.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say that I really like the way your presentation, talked about all these very technical things, but there are so many agencies that just have regular people who are asked to drive, and your best practice is really to apply to them also. Regardless of the supervisor's have a responsibility to make sure that people are prepared to drive before they're asked to drive state vehicles, take on the responsibility of property.
Precisely.
Exactly. Very well said. Exactly. Very well said. And you're exactly right. But you're exactly right. And you're kind of leading to those are the kind of questions that the manager's going to have to answer after that accident. You're going to be putting yourself in that position of saying, okay, how did you qualify that person? Was that person even qualified? Forget the driver, they're maybe a kid or a student or volunteer or somebody like that. You're going to have to answer this manager or them and that organization saying, why didn't you do what you really should have been doing to qualify the driver? I don't think that's a position anybody really wants to get into.
lot of different types of vehicles. I took a picture of a few of them. Boy, I found out this morning there are a lot more. You know, had golf carts on here, could add gator trucks, added all kinds of things on here.
But in general, you have all types of different shapes, sizes of vehicles within on your vehicle schedule. The latest number I had from Bob last week was over 2,500 vehicles. When we start adding smaller vehicles, the golf carts and the ATVs, things like that, may even be bigger than 2,500 in reality. And what's come up several times this morning or today, employees driving their own vehicles. There's a lot of that. So what we're going to be talking about is some best practices, qualifying drivers, whether they're driving their own vehicle or driving one of your vehicles. We're going to get into that. Of course, all these are many different types of vehicles, not all of them, obviously, but they all require different driving skills. There's a difference in driving what we drive our passenger cars or pickup trucks every day, whatever, back and forth, working around town, light trucks, passenger cars. Big difference in driving those, driving skills versus driving buses and vans, or certainly tractor trailer or a motorcycle. So we'll get into that a little bit more about training, making sure people are qualified to drive what you're having them drive. Along with the size of the vehicle, different challenges, traffic. I don't come to Austin often, but I know what traffic can be out there on 35 and some of the roads around here. It can be difficult. Road conditions, and of course the way they're using their vehicle. We're going to reiterate a little bit. Talked about a best management practice. There is some of you and maybe all of you have a safety program already within your organization, your agency, for vehicle selection and vehicle policy. There's I don't think we had any copies back here, but there's certainly one available. It's One Beacon's example vehicle fleet safety guide. It provides a lot of the written policies and procedures for what we're talking about here, and so along with some inspection forms, vehicle inspection forms, and some excuse me, other things. So if you need a copy of this, it's in a Word document. If you're thinking of starting from scratch with developing a policy, there's a really good start right here. Just let us know if you need a copy.
Yep, those are samples.
Yeah, this is just a sample.
They're not required.
Yeah, and you would need to tailor it based on what your operation is, because this has a lot of things in there that some of it may not apply, but it certainly is an excellent start of what ought to be in a driver program. Selecting the qualified drivers, training, maintaining the vehicles. We'll talk about that a little bit later on about having the maintenance of the vehicles. Reporting and accident investigation. Kenny, they talked about that a little bit earlier. We'll get into it a little bit more. Implementing corrective actions. Kenny mentioned that extensively before lunch, is that you investigate the accidents, you're going to come up with the root causes if you do it the right way. Out of those root causes, there's probably going to be some type of corrective actions, something that could have been done better to prevent that accident from occurring again. And then have drivers report violations. That should be a part of the policy, is that for commercial drivers, they're supposed to, part of their requirement for having a commercial license is they're supposed to report when they have violations, when they get a speeding ticket or they get some type of a violation. So I would have the same type of requirement in your policy as well. I put this in here, don't hire a volunteer for an accident. So you really need to check out the people that you're going to have driving your vehicles. You don't want to volunteer somebody that has an accident or hire somebody that has an accident. So these are just some examples here of some bus accidents, some van accidents. Match the skills of the driver to the vehicle. We've already talked about that. There's a big difference in driving a passenger car like we drive to driving a tractor trailer. You probably want to use even the vehicles that don't require licenses. Golf carts can be tricky to drive. The larger carts like you saw earlier that have like rows for several passengers on there, those can be tricky to drive. Those gators can be tricky to drive. A lot of times they're getting off-road on those, driving, off-road terrain. Getting training on all that type of thing, because all of them take a certain skill set, or they end up wrecking those or flipping them or something like that. even though they don't take a license per se. Proper license for the vehicle, we've talked about that. What this does is reduce probability of accidents. Put the right people in the right vehicles with the right training and manage them, you reduce your probability of having an accident. Reduce your liability claims and reduce your property damage claims. So managing that driver, everything Kenny's been talking about, management programs. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say that when we do 50-passenger van training, we encourage the organization to have master trainers available to do hands-on demonstration and hands-on evaluation and monitoring of your driving fleet, so that you have somebody who's available on site to provide tutoring, mentoring, whatever, so that people have the opportunity to demonstrate that they can perform the task prior to being required to do the task for the agent.
Excellent point. Yeah,
Absolutely.
That comes into the road testing part of it.
Yeah.
You know, and if the person's going to be the one doing the road test, to make sure they're the ones that are also very qualified to drive the vehicle. You don't want to put the rookie into the road testing for the other rookies.
Looks good to
You know.
me.
Master
Huh?
trainer.
Looks good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he drove it fine to me. He ran over curbs and everything, but he did all right. He made it back. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, I think some of your agencies are, and in fact, these pictures I took here were of some of y'all's trucks. You're talking about those instead of maybe like a 15-passenger van, having these larger buses.
Yep.
Right.
Go buy a 15-passenger bus with the ADA compliant, which they can squeeze in there.
Mm-hmm.
Still have 15 seats.
Yeah.
In area, and I'll just tell you, if you go out there, we have a 15-passenger van driving safety program. And if you go out there and do the training, it's just more cost effective. A lot of church groups use vans, and a lot of my agencies that don't have a lot of money, and I'll use TDCJ as an example. They load these vans up with offenders sometimes, so you have to have extra security, extra weight, and the more weight you put in that van, the rollover increases. The more passengers you put in that van, the center of gravity moves.
They're going to the wrong dealership because the buses are cheaper than they want to be.
Well, but you can't argue with the agencies about that. What we try to do, what I worry about, Harry, is the kid that drives the little car to work, and then they throw him in a 15-passenger van, and he drives the same as his car.
It's an entirely different environment. Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely.
That's what we try to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it is more cost effective for a lot of people.
So from a risk management perspective, it's always better to have a training document in the file that you can pull out and say, look, we did go through our basic due diligence, and we hired the right driver, we took them through training. I'm sorry that the van did turn over, but we've done all we can do from a management perspective to prevent that. So that's the place you want to be. That is a very good example of an administrative control. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, we work with that.
I mean, I've been doing it for 5 years. The same thing on rental. Don't go get a 15-passenger van on rental. Go get on lease on the rental.
And those kind of future plans to replace the more risky vehicles with safer vehicles, those kind of things can be built into your fleet management, where you have long-term goals to eventually eliminate them from your fleet. But I mean, at this point, you have to manage the risk that you have now. So that's where we're at with it.
A journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right?
By the way, there's one other class you don't have up there, ATV.
Yeah.
The ATV that you straddle. It's not a motorcycle endorsement. It's a ATV endorsement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here this is just a picture of all the different types of licenses here. We've already covered this. Driver selection. There again, I mentioned that in the last presentation. Have a prospect complete an application. 21 years of age. Correct. Everybody has to drive. Okay. Yeah, that's a good place to start. A copy of the driver's license. Order an MVR. We'll talk about the MVRs here and the requirements on running an MVR here in the next couple of slides. Check the reference. I mentioned that. Have a defined criteria in the One Beacon plan, and we'll show you here. There is a defined criteria determining whether somebody should be an acceptable driver or not. Complete and approved driving course. We've got driving courses available. I know you all have some driving courses. One Beacon does. I'll talk again about Summit. Summit's got a decision driving course, which is the driver course that's available to you at no charge. Along, there's also a driving course there, I believe, in our 15 passenger vans as well. So that's available for you. Obtain a driver's signed acknowledgement. Chris, you had me that a sign.
Basically, the signed acknowledgement goes back to something that our department has been encouraging. Once you've developed your driver safety plan, your procedures per se, we want to make sure that the employee, that you have some type of acknowledgement that that employee has been presented with what you expect of them if driving is a responsibility for their job. Make sure that it's clearly indicated that they need to, maintain their personal auto insurance. It's clearly indicated that they're supposed to report any violations they have. All of the things that we've been discussing today should be incorporated in your manual, but not only, just as a stated plan, but to have the driver actually be held accountable. You would need to make sure that you do have an acknowledgement form, and it also helps. It helps with HR. It helps with directors and officers liability. It helps with EPL liability. So those type of things. I know all of you have plans. Most of you may not have actual acknowledgements that the employee has to sign. So we encourage that that's something that you start to incorporate in going forward. So, and if you need samples, we have sample acknowledgement forms as well. Yes, Harry. I understand that. And as far as the insurance coverage is concerned, there is not an age restriction other than that they have to be licensed as a driver. 21 is the best practice. We want them to have some experience behind the wheel before we put them behind a state asset. So that's why that age is chosen. No, there's no additional fees with the statewide program.
Okay, and just to let you know, there is an example acknowledgement in the One Beacon policy. So if you do need a copy of that again, let us know. We'll get you one, and you can edit it a little bit if you need to. But there is an acknowledgement form in there. Here's the MVR criteria we were just talking about. Now this is pretty much an industry standard criteria. This is pulled out of the One Beacon policy. I've read several from all the other carriers, the Zurichs, the Travelers, the Hartfords, all of them. They all basically have the same criteria. It's pretty much an industry accepted criteria. And if your people are clear and acceptable on any of these, you're not going to have any carriers, One Beacon or anybody, arguing that, well, that driver shouldn't have been driving it. But on this column here, we have the number of minor violations. We'll get into minor versus major violations here in a minute. But minor violations, 0 to 4, and then you read across the top, it's the number of at-fault accidents for the past 3 years. So you can basically, obviously, 0 accidents, 0 violations. It's going to be a clear driving record. But, a person can have a couple of glitches, as you see, on their driving record over a 3-year period and still be acceptable to drive. So it's not this policy that, well, you can't have any accidents or any speeding tickets or anything for the past, number of years before you're qualified. So there are some areas that make them acceptable. You can have up to 3 at-fault accidents in 3 years. As long as you have no minor violations, you're acceptable. But then you get into some of these others where you have multiple violations and multiple accidents, then you fall into that borderline and poor. Certainly what I would set up as part of your management program that Kenny's been talking about, when you get into these poor areas, you probably need to find something else for that person to do rather than driving a vehicle. Because they're, you get somebody in 3 years that's had 3 accidents and 3 speeding tickets or whatever in 3 years, probably don't want them driving a state vehicle. That's just a management decision.
Right. One of the things I want to really drive home here is the important thing is that your defined description of what an acceptable driver is something that you have in your management processes. It can read a little different than this. We don't really care that it's slightly different than this. This is a sample. We want you to have something, whatever it is.
Based on their risk tolerance.
Yes, Bob.
Kenny, and you need to apply it, evaluate all MVR against that matrix, whatever it looks like, right?
Absolutely.
Without discrimination.
Precisely. Once you have a matrix like this or a descriptive set of guidelines, if you're using it on a regular basis, you're going to get away from some of these employment practice issues where over in this department you have an employee that has almost exactly the same record and you let this one go but you kept this one. The court system will really question you deeply about why you kept one and let somebody else go.
You still have a little problem because, like, Webster Fairland, when a vehicle hits the back of one of our has the ball unit on it, the totals or Toyota, the driver goes in as an accident, even though there's no damage on our vehicle. Try to took the rust off the ball. On the other hand, in Houston, you could go have a major accident and sign a voluntary MVR thing, what is it, El Polo or whatever, it never becomes part of a record. You know, all they want is the fines.
Yes.
So that's my problem with MVRs is when you're checking these and checking the person, he could have been at fault 5 or 6 times, his insurance paid, he did a no polo in Houston and it's wiped away.
We have to just go into the whole situation knowing that, right? Yes.
And he's been, in the last 3 years, driving one of our trucks, been rear-ended 5 times by idiots at, Whataburger.
Yes.
But
Taking that very example that shows why you need to be doing your due diligence. Because if you come back and you're hiring according to your criteria, and it says, okay, we looked at the motor vehicle record, it appears that he's still acceptable, and he has that accident a little later on at the Burger King, and the prosecution brings it up and says, well, this guy really has had 5 or 6. The question is going to be, were you negligent in the hiring process? No, because you have done your due diligence. You ran the motor vehicle record. The fact it didn't show up is a different story. All you can buy is what's on the permanent records there.
Walk downstairs, pay their fine.
Yes, sir.
The next day, go online that night, take the ticket dismissal course, walk into the judge the next morning, and all records.
Yep. But that's a totally different process.
That's absolutely true, but like Kenny's saying, if you go in and run the MVR, you can only judge your drivers based on what information you have. If it comes up in court, like Kenny says, if it turns into a lawsuit and the prosecutor finds out, yeah, this guy had 10 accidents over the last 4 years, and you can pull out the MVR and say, well, we ran on him 6 months ago, and it had 2 in the past 3 years or whatever. That's all you can go with. It's what you've done,
And if you built it into your policy or your manual, your driver safety plan,
you build in a way out. You know, you want to explain to the employee what's expected of them, set your expectations, try to follow them equitably among all employees. But MVRs are not going to be 100% accurate. There's going to be missing information. There may be wrong information that they need to contest.
Right.
So you'd want to have a statement indicating that other information regarding their report will be, you know, considered for, you know, adjustments to these expectations or something along those lines. Well, good. Then you should have documentation to put on their HR file. Up to, you're saying it shouldn't, the final word shouldn't be on the MVR?
Those cities, if the back of your truck's hit, that vehicle's totaled, or anything happens, both parties go into an accident. In Houston.
But is it an at-fault accident?
No, but it's still reported.
But we're talking
It's still going to show up on every law.
If you think that the terms and conditions of that individual event exclude them from being counted against this, as long as you document it, what your decision is, you should be fine.
We're going to get in a little bit on major violations, but we'll in the next couple of slides. But then they should be, in the last 5 years, should be equal, just be automatically poor. Just a couple of examples here. Oops. You know, no tickets, no moving violations are clear. 1 accident in 3 years, 2 in 3 years. You have the chart over there. You can look at it and see. Main thing is if they have a clear and acceptable driving record, an annual recheck is usually sufficient if it shows that they haven't had any problems. A borderline driver, like I've said and Kenny's been saying, we've all been saying, depends on the established criteria. You need to have that criteria, though. We recommend, now this is just a best practice, we recommend if it's a borderline driver, probably shouldn't wait a year to recheck their license. Maybe you check on that person every 6 months or so, just because they're borderline. They may have another speeding ticket. They may have something go on their record because their history shows that they get something maybe every couple of times a year. So maybe look at them more often.
And you should also start initiating proactive measures so that they don't become poor drivers. So start, you know, send them back to training.
Right.
You know, do a consultation with them and just kind of monitor them, mentor them so that they don't become poor drivers and now they're no longer able to perform that job function.
Right. Yeah, we always recommend, it doesn't have it on the slide here, but you certainly have some management intervention with the person, or manager talks to them and said, you know, we ran your driving record. You had two tickets over the past year and a half. You know, our policy is if you get another one, you know, you could be in trouble of not being allowed to drive or whatever the situation is. And it's good to have that one-on-one discussion with that employee if their driving record is getting close. Somebody that's poor would be 3 more accidents in 3 years, 4 more moving violations in 3 years, combinations of 2 or more accidents and moving violations. Here's your major convictions. I think we know what the minor convictions are. That'd be like your speeding tickets, running a red light, running a stop sign, you know, changing lanes improperly, stuff like that. But when you get into the major major convictions, a DUI, DWI, hit and run accident, reckless driving, using a vehicle to commit a felony, or a suspended driver's license, those ought to be automatically, they should be taken off the driver's list. If they hit any of those type of things over the past 5 years is what the policy on there recommended.
Also, there's a category that's not illustrated up here, and those are technical violations. Those are things like not wearing your seatbelt, not having your driver's license when you get pulled over, having expired tags. Those type of things should not be factored into to whether or not they're going to be an acceptable driver. And also, you can have your driver's license suspended for failure to pay child support. That's another technical conviction. So if you're evaluating MVRs and they happen to have a suspended driver's license, make sure that you're identifying what is the reason why the driver's license was suspended.
And Christy, do they have to have insurance? Personal insurance?
Absolutely.
And should we
It's
check
the law.
Yeah.
Check.
But shouldn't we check that?
Well, that's kind of up for debate. Some agencies do require their employees to turn it in. My philosophy, personally,
whether they give, what I give you today may not be enforced tomorrow, and there's no way you're gonna know about it. So rather than that, put it in your manual that it's contingent upon their employment and their driving responsibilities, they must maintain, personal auto insurance. That way you remove your responsibility of having to check it all the time, and they're acknowledging, signing off, saying that they're going to, fulfill those responsibilities.
Existing employees, we've talked a lot about hiring new employees, so what do you do with the people you already have? You go back and over the next month or so you create this policy and these new MVR criteria. Well, you got to do something with the people that are already driving. They've all got to have theirs checked and follow into the category. So for existing employees, check them annually. An acceptable driver, no action necessary. They have a clear MVR and acceptable. Kind of what Christy was talking about. We get into if they're marginal driver, you do some verbal counseling with them, check it again in 6 months, maybe require remedial training, retake driver training class. Even if the state or whoever, the insurance people don't require, if they don't require the driver training class, you can certainly, as their employer, say, hey, you need to go sign up for a driver training class, or we can provide you one at no charge through some of our resources. But you can certainly have them take a remedial driver training course. An unacceptable driver, you got to have that tough discussion with that person. Sorry, Joe, we know you've been a great employee for 20 years, but we ran your MVR, and you don't meet our requirements to drive. Then that gets into a tough discussion there, but you really need to have it with them.
I want to say something else on the suspended license issue. Some agencies I've worked with in the past, of course, having a license to drive is required to operate a vehicle on public roads. But if they have a suspended license and they still need to fulfill their obligations for employment, they can go and obtain an SR-22, which is basically it's like an endorsement onto their suspended license that allows them to drive forward. Oh, sorry. Am I not being loud enough? So if you have questions about that, you have an employee who has a suspended license and you want to see what options you have available, you can certainly contact, Kenny, you're familiar with the SR-22. It's not something necessarily that the carrier that we would issue, that would be their personal auto insurance carrier, but that would allow them to continue driving and performing, in course and scope for your business operations. So if you're not familiar with that, I wanted to mention that. And one more thing on the personal auto insurance, Sam was asking if we would be checking those. And my response was that it's really a workload that most agencies are not able to manage, plus there's no way to truly verify it. The other thing I want to say is that when you're developing your manuals, it's important, just like we have the MVR criteria and what's acceptable and what's not, state what your expectations are for them to maintain limits on personal auto. The reason I say this is that the state requires them to have the minimum financial responsibility per the law. However, I've seen some state agency manuals that say that they want the employee to carry, $250,000, limits that are exceedingly high. That puts an undue burden on that employee. And when you're in our program, there's no need to make that employee carry such a high limit when your policy will respond as long as they meet the requirements of the law. Also, if they're going to be driving their POVs, you may want to have it as a requirement or maybe as a suggestion that they carry uninsured motorists, because as we discussed earlier, if they have an accident driving their POV and the other party doesn't have insurance, they have no recourse on the state policy, nor are you liable for the damage to their vehicle or to anybody in their car. So those type of things are important to include in your driver manuals. It really will help the employee who's driving on your behalf understand what's expected of them, and then there won't be any false expectations of you as their employer. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Good. Thank you. Yes. Oh, got a couple of questions. Okay.
When they're enforcing this, like that you have before, when you create these policies, they have to be enforced equitably. If you're going to allow one person to move to a non-driving position because they're not eligible to drive, you have to allow all of them to. Otherwise, you'll be opening yourself up to further forfeited, and all kinds of other types of.
Exactly right. You got gotta implement it across the board. It's like I mentioned, if you're an employee that's been a great guy, Joe's been a great guy, he's worked for the agency almost his entire adult life, but then you pull the driving record, you're gonna have to have that discussion with them, you know. There's one more back here.
With the personal insurance, just say like, we have a guy that rides the bus line. He doesn't have personal insurance as far as a vehicle, he doesn't own a vehicle. So what would be your recommendation for that?
There's a term for it, it's a non-owned policy. It's a personal policy that they can purchase as a licensed individual, so that they can have any vehicle that they don't own, and they will have primary liability on their operations of that vehicle.
So you're saying like as for an agency, we should recommend that they actually get that?
If they don't own a vehicle, then they're not legally required to have insurance, but if they have to drive on behalf of their employment, then they can, that is an option in the market. They can go and get it's basically a non-owned policy, but it's for personal. Personal. I know I'm mixing up the terms. Personal, non-auto.
Named non-owned.
What's that?
It's a Texas named non-owned policy.
Okay. So you can just get a policy that you can drive vehicles even though you don't own the vehicle. So your insurance company asks, you know, what's your vehicle? You always ask, you know, what make and model your vehicle. I don't own one. I just drive one at work, or I drive a friend's vehicle sometimes.
The driver, not
The driver, right. I'm going to pay their damage.
But if we're part of the program, is that really required?
If you're part of the program, then if you put someone who doesn't own a vehicle behind a state vehicle that's insured on the policy, then it's not necessary.
Okay, because otherwise I'd have to reimburse them for that.
Yeah, that's not necessary.
And Dale, did you have something?
Yeah, one of the things that we recommend to a lot of our customers as far as the driving safety is that they do an expectation that a driver will reveal anything outside. If it doesn't show up, there's an expectation that if you have that or your license is suspended for that year, then you have to do to let your lawyer know that that's going on, especially if it's a major So,
Exactly.
I think with the different rules that you're used to, I think if you don't, you can some of the things that you have to be responsible, like your employer know when you have had incidents that should show up or not show up.
That's a great point that Dale just made. Did y'all hear that? That the policy should include a provision in there or a statement that the employee tells management, informs management when they've had something on their driving record. I know a lot of people are reluctant to do that, but make it a part of the policy that their obligation is to tell them. A lot of time goes by between, if you've done annual MVRs, I mean, they could run their MVR the next day, they could get a speeding ticket, and you wouldn't know about it for another 12 months. You know, so Dale made a great point, have that in their policy where they're required to notify you of any kind of violations. Okay.
What happens is you don't have a time limit on it, which means whenever.
Yeah.
Also talks about you get a ticket, it doesn't have to be a conviction. If you wait for a conviction, that can be months down the road. So, so you get some judgment in, you get what you're going to do. And the other thing is, if they run stop signs routinely, you get those flash tickets. You don't. That goes to the car.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
The car, not to the person. They're still responsible to let us know for that.
That's a good point.
Real good points. Good points. Alrighty. Next. This is a legal term here we're going to get into for a minute. I know some of you may have some thoughts about this, but negligent entrustment, it's like an insurance legal term there. Liability is incurred when an employer allows a person to drive a vehicle and knowing or having reason to believe, that's the big statement there, knowing or having reason to believe that the other person using the vehicle creates a harm to others. That places the responsibility for the driver error, recklessness, or incompetence on the employer and manager. So basically, if you know that the person had the DUI over the weekend, you know, maybe they don't tell you, maybe you hear from the grapevine or whatever, you have a reason to believe or know, or even could go as far as you ran the MVR, but it was the good old Joe, 30-year employee. He's a great guy. We're going to let him slide on this one, even though he had not the best record. We're going to let him slide. Well, then that could come back and bite you.
In my agency, is we had a driver hit somebody, the person got knocked, fell down, stood up, said, "I'm okay." Found out about that only after, in some way, shape, or form, because all the things are written if you have an accident. So we rewrote our rules that said, if you hit anything, I don't care if it's a dog, a pole, a person, because what you get is we used to call them C lawyers. And the C lawyer says, I only have to report if I get in an accident. An accident doesn't mean I ran somebody over. He doesn't claim that he got hurt. He still impacted somebody.
And another one we had down here, you could make it possible to report liability caps.
So if they're going into, if you're getting into the tort situation and they find out you were negligent, then of course they can remove those. Bob can speak to that. Okay. Yeah. Right. And that hits us up here, knowingly, even knowing or having reason to believe. So if you know that the person shouldn't be driving and you let them drive. Employers operating their own vehicles. Okay, we've talked a lot about them today. They should meet the same MVR criteria. Even though they're not driving your vehicle or state-owned vehicle, they need to meet the same criteria. I think we've beaten this horse quite a little bit today. Personal insurance is primary. They need to have their own personal, at least meets the state minimum requirements. The SORM policy provides the excess. We've talked about that quite a bit. And they need to maintain their vehicle. You know, if they're driving for SORM business and they're driving an old clunker out there that can barely start and barely get down the road, you might want to have a talk with them about maintaining their vehicle or driving something different. Accident investigation, Kenny talked a lot about this, conducting an investigation, review the results, determine the preventability. You know, what could have been done to prevent that accident and all those rear end collisions that Kenny talked about. That's basically the trend within your organization for accidents, the hit other people from behind or hit other drivers. There's those probably 99.9% of those probably could have been prevented. They probably get back to some kind of a driver era. There aren't a whole lot of accidents. We talked about a little bit at lunch. There's not a whole lot of accidents that happen, you know, when the brakes just go out or the steering all just went out and we couldn't steer the car anymore. That doesn't happen a whole lot. It's usually have something to do with the driver that caused that accident. Build in driver accountability when at fault. Hopefully your policies will have something that, okay, if you do have this accident, if you do have too many tickets, something like that, the employee is somewhat held accountable to that, whether it's a disciplinary write-up or whatever. There's some kind of policy. Identify and implement corrective actions, and consider, again, remedial driver training if it's necessary. Vehicle maintenance. We haven't talked about this much at all, but perform regular maintenance on your vehicles. I'm sure you have maintenance procedures and regular inspections of all your state-owned vehicles. Of course, the buses and everything have to be maintained regularly. Regular inspections, vehicle safety checklist. I put in here pool cars. I've had clients and even worked for some companies before that have pool cars. Those things seem to get forgotten. You know, they don't really fall under anybody's responsibility a lot of times. As anybody can drive it. You can have a different person driving it every day, you know, but somebody needs to be responsible for making sure those pool cars, because if I drive a pool car and I only get in the thing once or twice a month, I'm not the one that's going to be making sure the oils get changed, the brakes are good, the tires are good, and all that. Somebody should be responsible for those. So make somebody responsible to inspect, also inspect like pool cars or general fleet cars or vehicles. Have methods for drivers to report vehicle problems. They're again kind of tied to pool cars or any kind of state-owned vehicle, have a policy and a procedure in place to where, if they think something's wrong with it, or they get out there and find out that the blinker light's not working properly and the bulb needs to be replaced, have them have a process where they can report any kind of problems or deficiencies on the vehicle. If it's bad enough, have the vehicle taken out of service and repaired. So if it is a brake issues or brakes aren't good or the tires need to be replaced or something like that, have a policy and procedure where they're taken out of service altogether. Right. Right. Yeah, because 20 different drivers that drive this car, no one of them's going to step up and say, well, it's my responsibility to make sure the tires got replaced or or something got fixed. So distracted driving, we talked about that a little bit this morning in Kenny's presentation, leading to a lot of those accidents. Hopefully none of you do any of these things, but I tried to point out, putting on makeup. Sorry, ladies. But these are all guys doing these things. So, kind of get back. These are guys doing this. Guys texting, driving, eating, driving, texting, doing everything, drinking at the same time. Somebody checking their notes while they're driving, reading the report or where they're going. And then this lady driving and eating at the same time, got her burger and her Coke there. The sad reality is right here in the middle. This was a real accident. I put this one in here just to make a point. This happens more often than we like to think, but this was a real accident that happened last summer in the Dallas area in July of last year. A young teenage girl, a high school student, was driving this car and killed. The police ran the cell phone records at the time of the accident, and she was right in the middle of texting, or had been going through a series of texts with people. They even interviewed the people that she was texting in part of their investigation, said, yeah, we were just texting her right when she crashed her vehicle. But she was going along this road in about 50-something miles an hour and lost control while she was sending a text, probably driving with no hands on the wheel or something like that, hit the curb, car went out of control, and she was killed. So it's a sad reality that these things happen due to distracted driving. So encourage you, put it in the policy to employees. Do not allow to do these type of things that distract them while they're driving. Some of the common distractions, texting, using cell phones, eating and drinking, talking to passengers, reading maps, using the navigation system. I found that one out in my new truck a couple of months ago. Navigation system doesn't work while the truck's moving, or doesn't allow you to change it while the truck's moving. So I was guilty myself, so I had my daughter do it when we stopped. No cell phone and texting. You'll see these kind of signs out there. These kind of, as you probably all know, in school zones, they're illegal to use a cell phone while you're in a school zone. Prohibit employees from using them while moving. Cell phones and texting. Put that into your policy. Hopefully you've got it. If you need an example cell phone policy, I've got one. I'm sure Kenny's got one, and some of you may already have them. But have a specific, either a section of your manual or a specific policy for no texting or using cell phones while driving. Oops. Prohibited in school zones. DOT even prohibits. This happened, gosh, probably a year and a half ago, maybe the end of 13 or so. The DOT prohibited handheld devices in commercial vehicles. So now it's a violation of DOT. Silent and vibrate mode, use that. The easy way is to inform family, friends, or even other co-workers that, hey, when I'm driving, I'm not going to be answering my phone. I'll get to it as soon as I get to a point to where I can stop or answer the phone, but I'm not going to be answering it while I'm driving. Do what a lot of us, and I try to do most of the time, hopefully a lot of us do this, pull off when it's safe to make calls. Stop. If you got to take a conference call, or you got to call somebody, or you're getting a call that's very important, pull into that parking lot or that shopping center, wherever. Sit there for a minute, take the call, find out what's going on, and then travel on from there. And they're not.
the median or the shoulder of the road is not a safe place to stop.
Exactly. Yeah. Off the road, off the travel, the thoroughfare there. Yeah. Driver training programs. Defensive driving is required upon hire and every 1 to 2 years thereafter for your primary drivers. Like I mentioned, Summit has a decision driving course, and and we also have a 15-passenger. And I know from talking to the training department here that y'all have a 15-passenger van training program as well. Have regular ongoing safety meetings, training talks. If you have a large fleet number of fleet drivers, it's always good to have a safety meeting with them, talk about it. I mean, the weather's going to get lousy here, they're saying tomorrow. You know, if you have a fleet drivers and you know bad weather's coming in, where the roads are going to be bad or it's going to rain, pull them together and have a little safety meeting about, hey, be careful out there.
I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the Summit training. That is offered through our gracious brokers. It is an online course. It has probably over 100 at least courses in it. They're not only related to driving. It's every type of risk that you could probably imagine. So that's a good option. It's free. Our participating agencies just basically give us the information. We give them a username and password, and they can set up other employees in their agency. So it's an excellent option. We have 2 brilliant trainers at State Office of Risk Management, but they are servicing the entire state of Texas. So the on-site training that they provide is limited and subject to availability with scheduling. So if you can utilize the online training, that is a great option for you.
And like,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention near misses. You could put near misses in the policy as well.
Right.
Training if they change equipment, what they have near miss, or obviously. Right. Good point. Could you repeat the question, Scott?
He was mentioning you can also address near misses in your policy as well.
So the almost accident, the almost property damage accident, or whatever, could also be reviewed and used as a training or required national training if they have a near miss. So because like they say, kind of one of the insurance or the safety things is the only difference between the accident and the near miss is the only thing the near miss is you were lucky and you didn't have that accident. You didn't cause that property damage or nobody got hurt. It was simply a matter of luck. You still had the accident. You just fortunately didn't hit anything or weren't hurt. Just to kind of touch again on Summit, I would be your primary contact at Wells Fargo for Summit. So if any of you are interested in that, and like Christy said, there's tons of safety training in there. So it goes far beyond, there's much more in there than just driver training. So if you need regulatory type training, ladder safety, slip and fall prevention, anything that you might want to use for training employees, that's available for you in there as well. Right. And it provides testing and documentation of the training records, so you can enroll employees to have training. Then you could run a report and say, okay, old Joe went through 4 training classes in the last year or whatever that pertain to his job. So you can have that documentation. Questions? I think we're done with this one. Wow. Okay. Well, we're done with the slides. Well, there is a way. Well, the Summit report will. The Summit will report. We'll give you an Excel document on any training done within Summit. There's something else in Summit that you get into it that's called instructor-led training. What it is basically a platform where you can enter. You have to enter in other training outside the Summit, but it's for a record-keeping mechanism. It does training that's outside of the Summit training record. So if you wanted to design, it does allow you to do that. But
So I know that.
Say like
you
we have a seminar
like
like this, and we wanted to put this down as training for everybody, just not a summit class, but if we took all these, everybody that's here and enrolled in summit, said, well, they took the automobile symposium course, then it could also be included in the training record. But you're right, somebody's going to have to bring it in because have to go.
Yeah, I like what you take the data out, the lower part, put it in for our, especially like Sam's driver safety and stuff, it has to go into HR stuff so that we can check population names, people come and go and see who needs it.
Right.
And the two right now, I mean, down the line, it's nice if everything talk to each other. I would
Okay, well, that does conclude the actual presentations. I want to make one last comment. Everything that we provide free for all the information, all the benefits of being in the program, and even assisting you with some ideas on managing your risk outside of the program, all these risk mitigation strategies, it really goes beyond the liability that you have driving vehicles. It goes way beyond that. A good safety, driver safety manual, having comprehensive information in there touching on all of these factors that we mentioned will really help protect you from employment practices. It will protect you from workers' compensation claims. I mean, it's just so many different risks that it touches. So if you spend the time and make the effort on your driver program, you will see financial benefits, full circle in all different areas of risk. So we know the business operations require us to operate vehicles. So spend the time and get your manuals updated. And if you need help, you have excellent, knowledgeable, qualified risk managers that are assigned to you at the State Office of Risk Management, and they can review your manuals for you, edit, give you some advice on it, and just help you with that process. Make sure that you've got all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, and that's what we're here for. We are a resource, and I hope that you use us for that. Any other questions? Okay. No, guys. So the question earlier was whether or not the Board of Regents is covered by the Texas Tort Claims Act.
Whether or not your board members are covered as
workers' compensation.
And they are treated as an employee under workers' compensation. So, of course, SORM will make the determination whether or not they're in the course and scope and all the other rules that an employee is subject to. So if one of your board members is injured and you have reason to believe it is in the course and scope, go ahead and submit it through your normal process as you would an employee, and then SORM adjuster will handle it.
Okay. So they get workers' comp, but we're not sure about Texas Tort Claims Act. That's where we're at with that one. They would meet the definition of a state employee, so they would probably meet under the definition.
It would likely have to be in the course and scope. Well, there are instances where contractually, I could check if I get the response.
Speaking of contracts, that's a whole other class. Does I guess you're more than welcome to leave, but just real quick, one of the things that we were supposed to cover, which we didn't have an opportunity to, I don't know if any of you are involved in the contract process with executing a third-party contract as a state agency and being requested to provide waiver of subrogation or additional insured endorsements. Anybody? I just want to let you know that we do not encourage that the state issue or acknowledge waiver of subrogations on contracts. We've been requested in the past to provide those, and basically it is I don't want to say the decision, but it's the interpretation of our legal team at SORM that as a state agency, really there is no authority for you to waive subrogation. So if you're presented with contract terms that indicate that the vendor would like you, the state agency, to issue a waiver of subrogation on their behalf, negotiate out of that, or if you can take that information back to your contract specialist, that would be good. And if they have any questions about it, they can call our office. Any questions about that? No. Oh, yes, let's finish.